the last bite feeling. You open the fridge and there's one last portion of something your mom used to make, and you stand there for a second just looking at it before you even take it out. You heat it up slowly, almost like you're stalling, more slowly than you actually need to. Somewhere halfway through eating it, it hits you that this is the end of it. Not because the recipe is gone, but because the person who made it isn't there to make it anymore. And that's a completely different kind of gone. So you slow down, you take smaller bites than you normally would, you're trying to make it last, and it still ends anyway. There's a feeling for that, and it deserves a name, so call it the last bite feeling, that quiet grief that shows up right in the middle of eating something, not after it's gone, but while it's still in front of you. It's not just about losing someone, because it also happens with a restaurant that's closing next week, with a seasonal dish you forgot was only available until October, with a flavor from a hometown you moved away from years ago. The food still exists somewhere in the world, but this exact version of it, made by that person, in that kitchen, at that time in your life, doesn't exist anymore and never will again. Scientists call this context-dependent memory, which means the taste is never just the taste, it's everything surrounding the taste. And when that context disappears, the food becomes something heavier than food. The strange part is, you'd eat it again, knowing exactly how it would feel. Because that's what food and loss do to each other. They make you go back anyway, not in spite of the ache, but specifically because of it. Food memory ambush. You're eating something completely ordinary, cereal maybe, or a grilled cheese you've made so many times your hands do it without thinking, and nothing special is happening. It's just a regular afternoon, and then completely without warning, a memory arrives. Not a vague feeling, but a specific one, with an exact location. You're 8 years old and it's a Saturday morning and someone is in the kitchen and the light is coming through the window at that particular angle and everything was okay, and then you blink and you're back in your kitchen and the moment is gone as fast as it came. Call it a food memory ambush, when taste or smell bypasses everything and drops you, without permission or warning, into a moment from your past that you weren't even thinking about. Smell and taste are the only two senses that skip the brain's processing center and go straight to the regions that handle memory and emotion, which means they arrive before your rational mind has any say in the matter. And that's why a particular smell can stop you completely in the middle of a grocery store, or why biting into something can make your chest tighten before you've even understood why. It's not nostalgia in the greeting card sense, which is gentle and chosen. This is closer to being grabbed. More like time travel than like thinking about the past. Your brain built a filing system over the years, and certain foods are the only keys that open certain drawers. The hard part is that the more times you eat the same thing, the weaker the signal gets, because new memories layer over the old ones, and the original moment gets harder to reach, which is why some foods start to feel almost too precious to eat too often, like you're spending down something that can't be restocked. Stranger food, familiar feeling. You're somewhere new traveling, or at a friend's house, or sitting down at a restaurant from a cuisine you've genuinely never tried before, and someone puts a bowl of food in front of you that you have no reference for at all. You take one bite, not expecting much, and something clicks that has nothing to do with the food just being good, because good isn't the right word for what this is. It's more that your body seems to recognize this, even though your brain has absolutely no record of it, like arriving somewhere you've never been and feeling immediately at home. You finish the bowl and immediately want to know what it's called. Call it stranger food, familiar feeling, that uncanny sense of coming home inside a flavor you have never tasted before in your life. It tends to happen with umami-heavy dishes, or with spice combinations that hit fat, salt, acid, and heat in exactly the right ratio, and anthropologists think it goes back further than culture, that humans have eaten certain flavor combinations for long enough that our brains respond to them as safe before we have any logical reason to trust them. It's why you can walk into a stranger's kitchen in a country you've never visited and feel something relax in you before you've even sat down, because the food is speaking something older than language, and every once in a while it speaks directly to you. You'll spend years trying to recreate it back home, and it'll never be quite right. Not because the recipe is wrong, but because you cannot recreate the experience of tasting something for the very first time. And that version of it only ever exists once. Fridge standing. It's late, and the house is quiet because everyone's asleep, or you're alone, and you're standing at the kitchen counter, not sitting, deliberately standing, eating straight from the container, cold leftovers maybe, or peanut butter off a spoon, something you'd never plate up and call a meal. And here's the thing you've probably noticed before, but never thought too hard about: it tastes better than it should, noticeably better than when you eat the exact same food properly at a table with a fork and a glass of water, and you can't fully explain why, but it's consistent. The standing at the counter version just hits differently in a way that has nothing to do with the food itself. Call it fridge standing, the private, slightly guilty pleasure of eating alone with zero performance, the meal that belongs entirely to you because nobody else even knows it's happening. Food researchers have actually looked into this, and it turns out that when we eat with other people, a significant amount of our attention goes toward managing the social side, what we're saying, how we're coming across, keeping up with the rhythm of the conversation, and the food itself, paradoxically, gets less focus. Alone at the counter at midnight, all of that disappears and the food gets your full attention, possibly for the first time. There's also something about mild rule breaking that registers as pleasurable because you're not sitting down, you're eating at the wrong time, you're not using a bowl, and the brain responds to that small novelty in a way that makes the whole thing feel a little more interesting than it has any right to be. Everyone does this in some version or another, and almost nobody talks about it, which is possibly the entire point. Some meals are good precisely because they're private. Table piece. You're at the table with people you love and nothing significant is happening. Someone's reaching for the bread and someone else is telling a story that isn't even that interesting, and the food is good but not remarkable. Nothing about this moment would stand out in a photograph. And yet you feel it, this specific awareness right in the middle of it, that this is one of the good ones, not because anything remarkable happened, but because of exactly how ordinary and full it is, because everyone is here and nobody's looking at their phone and the conversation is going nowhere in particular. And the way you sometimes just know that you'll think about this dinner years from now. Call it table piece, that rare feeling of being completely present at an ordinary meal and knowing, while it's still happening, that this is enough, that this is actually the thing. Studies on what people say they miss most at the end of their lives consistently return to exactly this territory. Not the big events, not the weddings or the vacations or the celebrations that took months to plan, but the Tuesday dinners, the unplanned lunches, the evenings when everyone happened to be in the same place with nowhere else to be. Sharing a meal is one of the oldest things humans do together, older than most of what we call civilization, and we've been sitting around food with the people we love for long enough that something in us still registers this exact arrangement as the closest thing there is to being okay. You can't plan it because you can set the table and cook the food and invite the people, but you cannot schedule the feeling, and you only ever recognize it in the middle of it or after it's already gone. Hungry for nothing. You're hungry, actually hungry, not bored. You know the difference. And this is real, so you walk to the kitchen and open the fridge and stand there looking at everything in it, and nothing looks right. So you close it. You open a cabinet and look at that for a moment and close it too. Then go back to the fridge and open it again as if something might have changed, and it hasn't. This isn't a craving you can't satisfy, because a craving at least has a specific object. A craving is a want with a name, and what you're feeling is a want with no address at all, a hunger pointed at nothing, a need you are standing in your own fully stocked kitchen completely unable to solve. Call it hungry for nothing, that specific and frustrating experience of needing to eat something while being entirely unable to identify a single thing you actually want. Nutritionists and psychologists both recognize this as something distinct from regular hunger or boredom eating, and it tends to show up most often when you're depleted in ways you haven't consciously registered, yet emotionally drained, mentally exhausted after a day of too many decisions, running on empty in a way that doesn't have an obvious name. The body picks up on the deficit before the conscious mind does and sends hunger as its most familiar signal, but the actual shortage isn't calories. It might be rest, it might be connection, it might just be that your brain has nothing left for even small choices like what to eat. The fridge can't fix any of that, but the fridge is where you go anyway, because food is the most immediate answer we know to the feeling of something being missing. You'll end up eating something random, crackers or cereal or whatever, required the fewest decisions, and it'll be fine, genuinely fine, just not the thing, and you'll feel slightly better anyway, which says something about food and comfort that goes deeper than hunger. Recipe grief. You find a recipe card tucked in a kitchen drawer or folded inside an old cookbook between pages that haven't been turned in years, and the handwriting is someone else's, a grandparent maybe, or a great aunt, and the measurements are written in a way that only makes sense if you knew how that person cooked, because it says things like a handful of this or enough of that, or until it smells right, and there are stains on the card in 2 or 3 places from the last time it was actually laid out on a counter next to a pot. You stand there holding this piece of paper and feel the weight of it, the weight of all the dinners that came from this, all the people who sat down to eat what these instructions made, all the ordinary evenings this small folded card was quietly part of. Call it recipe grief, the feeling that a handwritten recipe is never just instructions, but a record of an entire relationship with food, and that when the person behind it is gone, something irreplaceable goes with them. Food historians say handwritten recipe collections are among the most personal documents they work with, more revealing than diaries in some ways, because they were never written for an audience. They just show you plainly what someone kept in their kitchen, what flavors they returned to every Sunday, what shortcuts they developed after 20 years of feeding people. Every stain is evidence of a real meal. Every scribbled adjustment is years of practice in a margin note. But most family recipes never get written down at all, because everyone assumed there would be more time, that the person would always be there to make it, and then one day they aren't, and neither is the recipe. Every family has at least one dish like this, something that existed for a generation and then simply stopped. A flavor that lived in one person's hands and left the world when they did. No record, no recreation possible, just gone. Eating alone, fine. You're at a restaurant by yourself, and this was a choice. You could have called someone or waited for plans to work out, but instead you made a reservation for one, and you're sitting here with a menu and maybe a book, or maybe just your thoughts, and the place is busy around you with other people's conversations happening at other tables, and nobody's paying any attention to you at all. Nobody is waiting for you to say something or watching what you order. You can take as long as you want. You can get exactly what you actually feel like eating without it being a negotiation. And somewhere in the small and ordinary act of sitting alone with a plate of food, something settles that is harder to find than it should be, less lonely than you expected, and more complete than the circumstances seem to warrant. Call it eating alone, fine, not a compromise, not a sad alternative, not something to explain or apologize for, just a meal that is entirely and uncomplicatedly yours. Solo dining has increased in almost every Western country over the last 20 years, and the cultural story around it still treats it like something you get through or make the best of, and restaurants still sometimes seat solo diners in the worst spots as if to minimize the awkwardness. But the people who eat alone regularly and actually like it describe something different. They eat slower, they notice the food more, they find out what they actually want when nobody else's preferences are in the room. In Japan, there's a concept called ohitori-sama, the honorable solo guest, which treats eating alone as a complete and dignified act in its own right, not a reduced version of something better, and most of us in the West haven't fully arrived there yet. A table for one still reads as a table that's missing something, but stay with it long enough, and it starts to feel like the opposite, not a table missing something, but a table that has exactly what it needs. Food is the one thing we do every single day, 3 times a day, sometimes more, our whole lives, and somehow, in all that time, we never really found the words for what it actually makes us feel. Not the taste, not the technique, but the feeling that lives around the edges of eating, the grief that arrives halfway through a bowl, the memory that ambushes you on a Tuesday afternoon, the specific piece of an ordinary dinner you already know you're going to miss before it's even over. These feelings don't have official words yet, but they're real. And if one of them is yours, leave it in the comments and tell me the food feeling you've been carrying around without a name for it. Because this list is nowhere near finished, and the best ones are going to come from you. Because the language of food is older than any language we have, and we've barely started translating it.